Hello there and welcome to the second video in this series all about using block chords in the context of creating and composing music. As with the previous video, all of the things that I'll be talking about today are just my ways of thinking about it as a composer. So these are all concepts and ideas that I myself genuinely use in my day-to-day job writing music for a living. And so in the previous video, we talked about two basic techniques to think about how to create these block chord melodies, where you've got this kind of chunky sound of all of these different instruments kind of playing together as one instrument with a chord on every note of the melody. And the two types of block chord voicings and arranging techniques that we discovered were parallel, where you're just keeping the shape exactly the same, and then using inversions, where we're moving between different inversions of the same shape, and then we're just kind of tweaking the chord for those notes that kind of land on the weaker beats that sort of go between the main inversions of the chord. And so in this video, I wanted to just really focus in on this topic of those in-between chords, what are sometimes referred to as passing chords. So let me give you an example. If we just take a really simple melody, if we just harmonize that using C major with different inversions, but tweaking it slightly, it sounds like this. So we've got one kind of inversion of a C major chord, and another one here. And for that little in-between note, I'm just tweaking the first chord that I played slightly by changing the top note. Now, we've got a couple of different options. We could leave it just like that, which sounds fine. It sounds quite natural to me. Sounds quite inoffensive. But really, the main point of this video that I want to leave you with is that you can do almost anything with these in-between chords. The reason being, because we've established ourselves very strongly in a key center, in this case C major, the little in-between bits are just like your accent color, and they're not going to rock the boat so much that the listener doesn't quite know what's going on, because you've set up C major and then you're resolving in C major, and so this little bit of kind of in-between motion, you can almost do anything. So the key thing here is to let your ears guide you. Use your imagination as to whether or not the thing that you're hearing matches the kind of vibe and the kind of effect that you're going for. But let's just take that really simple melody and think about some different ways to harmonize it using that basis in C major. So the first way that I'd like to talk about is a concept called side-stepping. And this is a bit like with parallel motion. We're keeping the shape fixed, although we're staying within the scale. So it's a diatonic technique. So in this case, the scale is C major. Here's our first shape. So to get to the in-between note, I'm just going to keep my shape basically fixed, but I'm going to move it up within the scale. So here, all of these, this is my starting position here, and then I'm moving each note up by one scale degree. So I'm going from here to here, like that. So that's, I think of that as side-stepping technique. Another example of side-stepping technique would be if I wanted to go I could go like this. Here's my starting position, C major. Or I could go. Let's do a minor example. Say we went like this. So here the chord preceding the passing note was this, and then the passing note was this note. So we went. So here I was using this shape because it was very similar to the shape that came before it. So it just kind of creates that nice little kind of comfortable feeling, because you're kind of keeping it roughly the same but just moving it along in the scale, which in this case I guess you could think of it as a C Dorian. That's one technique you can use. But again, it's whatever sounds good. You could take that concept of keeping the shape fixed, but be even more strict about it. So this time not staying within the scale, but just moving it like we were moving the parallel chords in the previous video. So let's take that minor example again. This time, rather than moving to B flat major, I'm going to move to B flat minor, because that would just be transposing the entire thing down by the same interval as the melody. Let's change up the sound just for variety. I'll do another example. Might become something like so the sidestepping in the first way, where we're staying within the scale, would sound like this. But this form of sidestepping, which you could think of as parallel rather than diatonic sidestepping, sounds like this. So again, that passing note, that sort of the melody note which doesn't sort of fit within the sort of main chords of that phrase, it's our kind of opportunity for a little bit of seasoning or a little bit of spice. So in this example with the parallel motion, you get an F sharp appearing, which doesn't belong to the main key that we're in, but to me sounds quite nice. So again, it's just something that you need to figure out, is that the sound that you're after? The next commonly used technique that I find myself reaching for when deciding how to harmonize a passing note is to use diminished. So I'll figure out which diminished chord is the melody note already a part of, and then I'll use that chord to harmonize. So let's take a slightly more interesting melody this time. So what I'm hearing in terms of chords underneath this is E minor to B minor. So that's our kind of vanilla, that's our starting point. But there are certain notes in there which we can harmonize slightly differently, just for a bit of extra flavor. So the first one would be this passing note, the F sharp. How should we handle this? Well, let's use diminished. So the diminished triad, or the diminished seventh that is part of F sharp is, or that F sharp is part of, sounds like this. So let's use that. And then we go to B minor. And I think I'll leave the end of the phrase just as it is there. So or we could do, which sounds a bit nicer because we get that neater motion in the lower voice. So that's just diminished again. But I've just omitted one note because I want to keep it in a 3. I want to keep the number of voices to 3. So that's something to consider when using diminished chords, is because the diminished seventh, which is the kind of the fullest version of the diminished chord, contains 4 notes. And so if you want to stay within 3 voices, you just have to decide which one you're going to omit, where it makes sense. So we've got 2 options here. Or So I think I'll go with the second one. Let's try a major example now. So let's take B flat major, and we'll switch the instrument. Why not? Let's go to strings. Okay, so let's just say we're staying B flat all the way there. So, what are we going to do about these notes? Because they kind of don't really go with the B flat chord naturally. They have to go with kind of, we have to tweak our B flat chord at that point. So, let's try diminished again. So, sounds pretty nice. So diminished is a very good kind of go-to, I find, but it does create a very rich sound, so it just depends whether that's what you're after. I find the kind of tweaked version of B flat chords a bit more simple to listen to. Versus or so again, I'm just deciding which notes of the diminished chord to omit there. So generally what I'm finding when I'm combining triads, in this case close position triads, with the diminished passing chords, it makes sense to do a spacing where I'm omitting the second note from the top. That just seems to work for me in this instance. Let's take another melody and talk about another strategy for harmonizing your passing notes. So let's do something like this. We're in C major again, and we're going to do something like that. So all C major, and we want to do block chords for that. So we could use any of the options that we've already covered, but I'm going to move on and talk about implying the 5 chord as your strategy. So, although actually for a melody like this I don't think it would suit it very much, but I'll just follow it through anyway. So essentially what we're doing is imagining that every note that isn't our kind of target chord of C major, we're going to be thinking of harmonizing it in terms of the 5 of C major, which is G major or G dominant. So it's a bit like we're just adding some extra chords in there, and we're going C, G, C, C, G, C, C. Is that right? So every chord that isn't the C major, I'm kind of pretending it's a dominant chord, so it's kind of going 5-1, 5-1, 5-1, which usually is something that makes sense to the ear. Here we've got some kind of quite spicy chromatic notes in there, so I'll be curious to see how this sounds with a 5 chord underneath it. But so if we stick to 3-note voicings, so what I'm doing is tweaking a G major shape there, which ultimately gives us a G major sharp 5. Then we're going to our next inversion, and I'm thinking G major. I guess we could do that. So, not a big fan of that, but it kind of works. Again, you can kind of do anything because of the fact that we're rooted in that C major, so all you hear is like outside, inside, outside, inside. You hear kind of neutral and then spicy. But I think actually a better choice in this situation would be to use parallel sidestepping. So the sort of second example that we had right at the beginning would be the more natural choice, but it does kind of work thinking about putting notes in that kind of are borrowed from the G major. Especially that first one's quite nice. I'm trying to use B and D from G major there, which kind of works, but I'm not a huge fan. So, you know, let's try a different melody that maybe suits the 5 treatment a bit more. Let's try in a minor key, A minor. So something really simple, something like that. I'm pretty sure this is going to work well with 5. So there I'm using the 7th, so 7th of E dominant 7th, and the 3rd would work well. And again, at a kind of meta level, we're just thinking this is all in A minor. We're not thinking A minor, E, A, unless, you know, we're focused in that particular part. Overall, when we're listening to the piece at a kind of higher level, we're just thinking A minor with some spicy notes in between. Let's take one more major example. Would work. So I've got implying A7 there, or could also work. Again, because it's a dominant 7th chord, you know, that has 4 notes, and I'm trying to stay within 3 notes at the moment, so you have a choice of or. And then here, it definitely feels like it makes sense to choose these notes, which come from A7. Sorry, they're slightly weirdly spelled on this automated stave here, but G, C sharp, E. So that's interspersing it with the 5 chord. So taking this concept and kind of generalizing it a little bit, you can think of almost any chord as a tension against your main chord. Say if we're in C major, anything that isn't C major could be thought of as setting up tension that wants to resolve back to C major. You know, in other words, it could be thought of as a kind of dominant. So you could use 4 chords, you could use minor 4 chords, you could use 2 chords, you could use flat 2 chords, you could use chords that are a tritone away. Basically anything that isn't C major feels foreign to C major, kind of by definition. Let's take a tritone away, F sharp. You know, if we've established that we're in C major, and then you know, we kind of oscillate between C and F sharp. So say you had a melody that goes, and you could harmonize that by going. You know, that's a particularly fruity sound, but maybe that's what you want. So I'd like to just encourage you to experiment with this idea of choosing a complementary chord and then sort of sticking with it over the course of your little phrase, just like we were doing with the dominant chord. So here are 2 exercises to kind of kickstart your use of block chords. We're going to start here on a C major chord with a C in the melody, and we're just going to go up a scale, and we're going to be switching between the 1 chord and then various inversions of 2 and 1. So C major, D minor, C major, D minor, C major, D minor, C major, D minor, and so on. So, as you could hear, we're sort of describing this kind of scale, and we can use that scale to ultimately construct melodies. Made a slight mistake there. But yeah, if you can get really comfortable with that, you know, initially just in C major, but then to take that idea and practice it in other keys as well. This is something that I mentioned in the previous video. I really like to use my instrument as a way of internalizing this harmonic concept. So using it as an improvisation tool, and that means playing it in different keys. That way it just gets into my system, and then when I'm composing, I can access that straight away. So if we go to A flat major, or G major, I'll include a handout for this exercise in the description below, so you should be able to click a link to download that. Another exercise that you could do if you're a little more advanced is to take a similar concept but using a major 6 chord rather than just a straight major chord, so a 4-note chord this time, and to intersperse that with diminished chords and go up a scale like we did before. So it sounds like this. So this is the kind of thing which will unlock a particular kind of quite jazzy 1950s-esque block chord writing, especially if you put it in the strings. And especially if you combine it with some parallel sidestepping. If you like that sound, here's a variation using a minor 6th chord, but also just using diminished chords as your passing chords. So C minor 6. So again, the point of practicing it as an exercise that's a scale means that you can start to make a melody out of that scale. Becomes, for example, so that's something that you'll be able to access the more comfortable you are using that kind of technique, and the exercise is a great way to get comfortable. I really encourage you to not just stick with these 2 examples though, but to kind of just generalize from this concept a little bit. So taking this idea of a strategy where you're moving between 2 complementary types of chord, you can very easily start to come up with your own exercises and patterns based on the sounds that you like. So maybe you really like the sound of going to the major 2 chord instead of the minor one, like C major to D major. Gives it a very kind of bright sound. You could easily do an exercise where you're just doing that kind of thing. Creates another kind of scale, which again you can make a melody out of. You know, that kind of thing. You could, you know, just experiment with slightly more unusual combinations, like a flat 2, for example, sounds like this. And just going through the inversions gives you an odd kind of scale on the top, you know, a little bit unusual. You know. So lots of fun can be had. So it's really not about saying that these are the ways to do block chords, but more just to kind of give you examples to see them in action, so that ultimately you can make your own choices about the ones that you like. So far we've covered the concept of sidestepping, keeping the shape the same and then doing that in parallel or diatonically. We've talked about diminished as a passing chord strategy. We've talked about implying a 5 chord, and then we've generalized from there to say implying almost any other chord as a complementary color. I just want to close the video by talking about quite a different way of thinking about all of this stuff, which is kind of to put all of those sorts of strategies to one side and instead just purely think in terms of melodic lines. So this sort of involves letting go a bit about what are the chords that I should use to harmonize the melody and focusing instead about what accompanying lines might sound good. So let me give an example. So say we have a melody like this. Okay, so I've just captured that. I'm going to play it back. Okay, now, first of all, what's going on there harmonically? No. So it sounds like it's going to end on the dominant, so it's kind of going... And then maybe it goes back to the tonic chord there. So the first thing I might do is just add the bass line to kind of clarify the harmony, and I'm going to do it in exactly the same rhythm as the melody. Okay, so that's fine. Now let's try and kind of hear what other lines might go along with it, and I'll just use my voice as well. Do 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 do, maybe do 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 do, might work. Let's try that. Kind of. Yeah, that sort of works. Now. Do da da do da dun 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 or dun da dun dun da da dun dun. Maybe something like that. Okay, now let's remove that bass part and see if I can come up with something that fits a little better. Boom, boom. So I want the bass note to identify the bass, like the main notes of the chord. So I know it wants to start on a C, bum, and then finish on a G, bum. And I'm just going to kind of use my ear and my kind of best guess as to how to get there in a nice way. Bum, dun, 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 dun. I kind of want it to do something like that. Dun, 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 dun. That feels like a nice shape. Dum 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 dum, maybe dum bum bum dum 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 would be what? Would be good. Don't like that. Dun dun dum bum, yeah. Dun 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 bum 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 bum. So you know, it's not the most sophisticated block chord writing in the world. I could probably make it better by spending a bit longer on it, but you get the general idea. We're just prioritizing the individual lines and making sure that they all make sense and feel complete. They're not jumping in strange ways. Everything's quite singable. So we're sort of emphasizing that singable aspect. And then we're sort of trusting that our ears aren't going to fail us in terms of making it make harmonic sense. And sure, we're going to end up with a few little bits that might rub, but the fact that each of the melodic lines makes sense kind of makes up for it, and so we're not too worried about it. So there you have it. That's pretty much everything I know about how to do block chord writing, specifically with this emphasis on harmonizing our passing notes in interesting ways. So ranging from quite free techniques like we just did there, using our ears mostly, and just trying to create singable lines, all the way to using more strict kind of structured techniques, such as with parallel sidestepping, where you're keeping the intervals between the notes absolutely the same. So there's a whole range of things to play with there, and once again, you know, the purpose of these examples and the exercises is not to tell you the correct way to do things, but it's really just a jumping off point to show you a bunch of examples of how things can sound, and really it's just up to you and your taste and the musical context that you're trying to serve. Just to say that although I've pretty much exclusively been using closed position 3-part voicings in these examples, everything, all the concepts, the ideas of which chords to choose, and the idea of moving between inversions, all of that applies regardless of the kind of voicing that you're doing. So In practice, what I often do is sketch things out using closed position chords, but then revoice them later, for example, by taking the second from the top voice and then dropping that down an octave to create a more open sound. So, that's something that you might want to try yourself. So that's it. I'll leave you to have fun and mess around. I'll put a link to a download for the exercises just in notated form in the description below. Feel free to give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and in the meantime, I'll see you on the next video. Thanks very much for your attention.